Welcome all. It's my pleasure to welcome today Sisian Bogosyan, who was recently appointed as the new head of Armenia's Tourism Committee. Ms. Bogosyan is from Canada and initially came to Armenia through the EGORTS program. We'll be discussing what she hopes to bring to the Tourism Committee and what can be done to help Armenia's tourism sector flourish. So Ms. Bogosyan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
To start off, in terms of tourism in Armenia, the COVID-19 pandemic obviously really hit the sector hard. The now former head of the Civil Aviation Committee, Tatevik Revazyan, was saying that shortly after the pandemic, it will take years for Armenia to go back to pre-COVID levels of tourism. Of course, passenger traffic at Armenia's airports doesn't represent all of the tourist inflow coming into Armenia, but having said this, the recent numbers coming in 2021 and now in 2022 are exceeding expectations for many. So, in your opinion, has Armenia managed to push itself onto the track of returning to pre-COVID levels of tourism?
I think so. And you're absolutely right. We had very terrible numbers back in 2020, obviously because of COVID and of course due to the war as well. We dropped about 80% compared to 2019, which was the best year that we've had ever in the tourism industry in Armenia. Over the last 10 years, we've seen sort of a 10% growth year over year until 2019, but of course followed by 2020, we were down 80%. In 2021, we were able to regain some of those numbers. We were up to about 870,000 tourists back in 2021. And this year we're doing much better compared to last year. So every year we're seeing the gain in those numbers back to pre-COVID numbers. Of course, it'll take some years. This year we will not hit the numbers we had in 2019. I don't want to make any promises, but hopefully by the end of 2024, we should be able to at least hit those numbers that we had in 2019. But so far, the first 5 months up until the end of May this year, we're about 470,000, if I'm not mistaken. So we're definitely on the right path. And we have the best, I guess, 5 months coming up. Usually between June to October is when we see an increase in those tourism numbers. So for sure, we have the best 5 months ahead of us still. So I'm confident that we'll be able to do pretty well.
Okay, and I mean, due also to the war between Russia and Ukraine, there has been a large influx of Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians settling in Armenia. They aren't really tourists though, because many of them are working and are staying here long term, but many believe that this inflow has inflated the numbers in terms of passenger traffic, in terms of inflow into Armenia. Has this distorted the reality with regards to like tourist numbers? And secondly, has the inflow of these foreigners moving to Armenia put a pressure on tourism infrastructure, on finding, places to stay, accommodation, and transport even? What can you tell us about this topic?
So yes and no. Answering your very first question about the numbers being whether they're true or not. Back when the war started in March, we saw sort of consistent numbers from those that were coming from Russia, about 31,000 in March, 32,000 in April. And in May, we saw the largest number of 50,000 that were coming from Russia. And of course, they have their holidays in May, which is why we saw sort of the increase of individuals coming from Russia in May. When compared to past years, pre-COVID, those numbers aren't really any different. So those that are coming may be staying longer, but I don't know if they're coming just because of the war. Of course, Russians right now can't travel to many countries, and they can to Armenia. However, we do have some challenges with flights as well. So there's definitely very much a huge decrease in the number of flights coming into Armenia from Russia. And so those numbers can't really be inflated because there's only a certain amount of flights that come in every day. So yes, from that perspective, we see tourists coming from Russia and maybe staying longer, but we won't know until by the end of the year whether they're staying or not. From a sort of a definition perspective, tourists for us are those that stay more than 24 hours and under a year. So they might be staying a few months. Some may be working, but some may be digital nomads, so they're here working online for other companies that they're currently employed by. So from that perspective, we'll see what happens by the end of the year. In terms of infrastructure, we have in Armenia over 800 hotels. We have over 20,000 rooms. And we have Airbnbs and apartments that people can rent. So in terms of infrastructure, yes, we have seen an increase in prices. It's normal economics, demand and supply. However, we do have the infrastructure to definitely be able to welcome more tourists. As I said, we had the largest number back in 2019 with 1.9 million tourists, and we were able to welcome them easily. And we will not be hitting those numbers this year. So of course, anybody that's coming in right now, I think we should be able to manage. I'm not too worried.
Okay, and you mentioned the term as well, tourism infrastructure, and sometimes I may pretend to know what that means, but it is a complicated term. I mean, tourism inflow may be high, but the quality of tourism infrastructure could be a whole different topic to discuss. In your opinion, what are Armenia's greatest challenges with regards to tourism infrastructure? What would you like to see improved? And what are some of the obstacles you are dealing with at the moment with regards to the infrastructure?
So you're absolutely right. In terms of infrastructure specifically, that's basically when you're looking at accommodation or roads of getting you from A to B. Those are sort of some of the challenges that we have. We don't want the infrastructure challenges to take away from the experiences of the tourists that are coming in. Of course, when we're looking at roads, the quality of roads are not great, but I mean, we will talk about some of the solutions that we have and some of the things that we're working towards. But Armenia has very much winding roads, and the quality of roads might not be so great, especially in the regions. And so it might be difficult for tourists to be able to travel to the destinations, the tourism sites that they want to go visit. So that's one of the challenges that we have, and that's one of the complaints that we often hear from tourists. But we make up for it in other ways. So that's what, in terms of infrastructure, that remains one of the detractors of the experience, whether you're going with independent drivers or whether you're going with tour buses as an example. The roads and the limited maintenance might be an issue. Another challenge is sort of the site maintenance of the actual tourism sites as well. So that's also some of the things that tourists may talk about. Another challenge that I speak about often as a marketer is sort of the awareness about Armenia that currently there's a lack of. Despite the growth that we see in tourism and its positive economic impact that we know it has on any country, especially in Armenia, Armenia has yet to carve out its rightful place, I would say, in the global tourism landscape. And what that means is awareness about Armenia is quite limited globally. I'm sure when you speak with internationals outside of Armenia, they'll ask where you're from. You say Armenia, they say Romania. You're like, no, Armenia. They're like Albania. You're like, no, Armenia. And so there is this lack of awareness about Armenia and where it is on a map. And when you start from there, you know that we have sort of a very long journey ahead of us in terms of positioning Armenia in a way that people would want to come to Armenia and visit it. And then, of course, the next step is, what does Armenia have to offer and how do we position it to the global market in terms of their interests? Armenia's overall brand in the sort of the global tourism market does not adequately represent its value proposition and what we have to offer. So as a destination, and we have many wonderful attractions, of course, particularly it's our people, history, nature, the gastro, food and wine. You will not find one person that comes to Armenia and they do not enjoy the food, of course. So for me, it's really important to also position Armenia in a way that is attractive and wants people and makes people want to come to Armenia. But that's just from an international perspective. I also want to appeal to the diasporans because we have, about more than 7 million diasporans living outside of Armenia, many of which have not been to Armenia. So that for me is a concern. So if you really go down to the why of it, right? So I have so many of the diasporans never visited Armenia. Maybe a few reasons. One may be, there's not much interest. They might have other destinations to visit at the top of their list. But one thing that I hear often is, the stories they've heard from their parents and grandparents dating back to the 90s, from the dark, cold years, is still sort of the idea they have about Armenia today, the perception about Armenia. And so for me, I want to be able to challenge those perceptions and change those perceptions, because what they think of Armenia 30 years ago is definitely not what it is today. And the amount of potential Armenia has as a tourism destination is limitless, for me anyway. I think there's so much more growth for Armenia. And so one of my mandates is to make sure that I can position Armenia in a way that will entice our diasporans to come to Armenia, and not because of the churches and monasteries, not because of the historical or cultural implications, but all the amazing things they can do here. Of course, they're probably very much aware of the food, but maybe they don't know about the amazing wineries we have, or the amazing wine we have, or the amazing beautiful nature and landscapes that we have, the great hiking routes that we have. I was just on a hiking trail this weekend, 18 kilometers. I would recommend it though, it was really great. And of course, adventure tourism, I don't want to leave that out, where it's definitely a growing sector for us. I was on a hot air balloon ride a few weeks ago. You can go wild water rafting, you can go canyoning, you can go rock climbing, you can go paragliding. There's so many cool activities that you can do in Armenia that I think people just don't know about. And so that's what I want to show, not just international visitors, but diasporans too. Like, come to Armenia, and these are all the things you can enjoy. We won't talk about the nightlife, because we know it's amazing, but those are all the great things that people can enjoy in Armenia.
But for our watchers, how exactly could one raise awareness of Armenia as a tourism destination? Is it possibly through advertisements? Is it travel vloggers? What are some of the ways we can work on this issue?
Of course. Well, as a marketer, this is the topic I'd love to talk about. So we've started with launching our brand. So we have just launched our new tourism brand for Armenia as a destination, Armenia, the Hidden Track. And it speaks to the unexplored, undiscovered country that is Armenia today. And there's also sort of a mysterious and surprising element to that as well. The hidden track, what does it mean? Come discover what that means. There's so many ways we can position that. And we are leaning into, again, not just a cultural aspect of it, but the natural, the gastro, the adventure side of what Armenia has to offer. So we have just launched our new brand at the end of May, and we will be taking this new brand forward with all of our assets, whether it's online or offline. And the most key thing here is consistency. So we'll have a very consistent message about Armenia to the international community about what Armenia wants to represent and position itself as. So that is sort of the first big step. And we will be working especially with our partners as well, private sector and public sector, and whoever wants to represent Armenia on an international stage, we invite them to use our branding. Our brand book will be available openly to our partners for them to also lean into that. Because again, we want one consistent message for people. When they see that, they know it's Armenia. They won't mistake it for Romania or Albania anymore. Secondly, we are launching our new website. So we also have a current website. It's old, but we're working on a new one, armenia.travel. And the new website will be launched in a few months. The design part is completed. We have now moved into sort of the back-end coding part, which will take a few months. But on the website, all the correct information about how we're positioning Armenia will also be available. It's, we're leaning into what makes Armenia different, sort of those hidden gems about Armenia that you might not know about. We want to make the experience not just user-friendly, but easy for our tourists. We want to make it easy, but you want to come to Armenia for a few days, what should you do? You're coming here for 2 weeks, what can you do? We want to make that experience very easy for our tourists and put our best foot forward, show what Armenia has to offer. And so we have a new content team that is helping with writing all the content for the website as well. Including new images and new videos about Armenia as well. So we're very excited about that. That's from sort of a branding perspective. In terms of sort of the marketing aspect, like you mentioned, absolutely, there'll be digital online advertising, but also offline as well in our key target markets. Currently, the countries that we're focusing on, due to many reasons, include Russia, Iran, France, Germany, and the US diaspora. Georgia continues to be a transit hub for us, And the UAE is a huge potential market that we're working on as well. There's definitely a lot of interest, especially when it comes to winter tourism. It's very hot there. They want to escape it sometimes. So I think Armenia is definitely a good alternative for them. And so we'll be doing key targeted advertising in those markets this year, so that we can elevate the profile of Armenia, and specifically in those target countries. Again, like you mentioned, we'll be doing familiarization trips, fam trips, for both press and so media and also influencers, again, from those target countries. We want to make sure that we are hitting those countries specifically this year. Of course, there are so many countries in the world, but we want to make sure that we're having very key targeted marketing in those countries, so we can elevate the knowledge, and I guess, about Armenia. So once we are at a place where we know those countries are coming to Armenia without much help, we'll look at other options about what other target markets we should go into. What else? We have B2B collaborations between our private sector and the private sector in those target countries as well. Of course, those tour companies still continue to work. Again, because Armenia is a smaller country and people may not know about it, sometimes they lean into those tour companies to help them plan their trips. And so it is important for us to create those connections between our private sector and the private sector in those target countries. So the B2B aspect of it will start working better. So that's what we're also working on. And of course, expos as well. We were at MITT in Moscow in March, again, representing Armenia. And we were at ATM in May in Dubai. And so we'll also have another expo towards the end of this year, hopefully WTM in London. So again, in many different aspects, we continue to represent Armenia on a world stage, so that they continue to hear the country name Armenia, and it becomes common for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting how much of it is marketing and branding, and also this phenomenon of travel vloggers, Instagram influencers coming to Armenia, racking up thousands of views. It's interesting how things like that really actually help put Armenia on the map. I also want to ask finally about job creation. So, I mean, both the Armenian state and the Armenian people are very hopeful of having a flourishing tourism sector in the country. But one of the concerns is how this will create jobs, well-paid jobs for the local people. I mean, with regards to providing opportunities for people in Armenia, not just in Yerevan and across the country, why is the tourism sector, how can we make the tourism sector a sector of job creation, of high quality jobs? What can you tell us about this issue, about job creation and employment?
Tourism made up about 14% of Armenia's GDP in 2019. So we know it is a sector that definitely brings a lot to the table and has a huge impact on Armenia's economy. And of course, as we get back to those pre-COVID numbers, many countries are in a challenging position where during COVID, they were laying off many of their employees in this industry. And now there's a concern, again, across the world, not just in Armenia, of how fast they can bring those employees back, because now we're getting an influx of tourists. Everyone wants to travel. Everyone wants to get back to sort of the freedom that they had. So again, in Armenia, as of May 1st, everyone knows that there's no longer any COVID requirements entering the country. And that's also helped the numbers that we're seeing from tourists coming into the country. And so there's potentially concerns about how quickly we can get those employees back into the industry. But tourism, it's such a diverse, I would say, industry, right? You cover everything from the restaurant industry to the hotel industry, to group tours, to any of the wineries, to really anything that you can think about. Tourism has a little bit of it touches a lot of different industries. So I think from my perspective, I see a lot of the youth in this industry, which is exciting for me. I think the youth in Armenia are very motivated and very creative, which gives me hope. And I invite them to be creative and think outside the box of how they can potentially service this industry, service the tourists coming into the country, in an exciting way. We are going in very much in a digital direction. What can they do in that sense? VR continues to be a growing segment. What can they do when it comes to tourism in that segment? There's a lot of cool business that are coming up related to that as well. I think that the industry is definitely on the mend, and I think there'll continue to be jobs in this sector. So I think for those that are interested in working, there's always going to be work. So.
And finally, briefly, obviously, you came from Canada. You are now head of Armenia's tourism committee. What has the journey been like, and how have you settled in to your new role?
I came to Armenia, honestly, not with sort of any purpose in mind. I came to Armenia back in September of last year through the Igor's program, through the Diasporan Office. And really my goal was to make any sort of impact as a marketer in Armenia. And I ended up working at the tourism committee to start. So that's where I initially got placed as well, and I was able to see some of the opportunities and challenges that was facing the tourism committee. And when the opportunity came up for this role as the chair of the committee, it was very interesting for me because as a diasporan, I felt like I had a duty and obligation of some sort, but also excitement in it in terms of what kind of footprint can I leave in the tourism industry, but for Armenia as a whole. And so this job sort of fell into my lap, I guess you can say. Of course, I've sort of worked really hard to get to where I am in terms of gaining the experience that has put me in this position today. But it has been definitely interesting. Armenia has always felt like home for me. And coming here back in September, it was no different. I sort of was able to make transition into Armenia very easily. Lifestyle here is definitely what I enjoy. Very different than North America, but it's something that I think gives me hope as well. There's so much opportunity in Armenia, and I cannot stress that enough. In Armenia, there is so much hope and so much potential, and that's why I'm here, because I know that I can make a difference, and that it would be felt, and that for me is very exciting.
Okay, great. Well, Sisyan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.